It's a pleasure to be here with you. Good morning where I am. Very cold also in the city of London, but I think it's going to be a hot topic that we're going to be discussing today. So, firstly, welcome to all the panelists. I will be introducing you in a while, but I wanted to start the session with narrating an incident that took place quite recently. Last week, I was at the King's Cross station waiting to board the Eurostar to go to Paris. I wasn't yet on the platform, but I was in that waiting room just after the immigration. Passports checked, formalities all done, and obviously there was a time for a pause before the real movement began. That's an interesting space, no longer where you were, not quite where you're going. But I was just going through my notes, and which I would use for the next LinkedIn post that I'd be doing. I'd been following the developments taking place in Davos at that point of time. And I was hoping to put something up on LinkedIn when a gentleman walked up to me and he introduced himself. He said, I had heard you speak at a conference in Mumbai last year. So he was a banker. And he said that the session that he attended stayed with him, particularly the part about how valuation is changing. And then, as these things go, we started with the usual small talk. Where are you traveling to? What do you do? And then he asked me three very important questions. The first question was deceptively simple. How do you value a company today when the biggest risks and opportunities sit outside the balance sheet? So that was the first question that he asked me. So we spoke about supply chains, we spoke about dependency risk, we spoke about regulatory exposure, of course, ESG, not as abstractions, but as drivers of future cash flows and cost of capital. Then came a second question. If resilience matters so much, is what he said, then why do most boards still treat it as insurance rather than strategy? Now, that question, if you think about it, it lingered with me. Doesn't show up neatly in quarterly numbers until, of course, it fails. And then finally, his third question. Do you really think that markets are pricing this in, or are we still behind the curve? That was a moment when the waiting room for me began to feel like a metaphor. What struck me really was the fact that he was very technically engaged. He wasn't just asking philosophical questions, he was asking very specific questions. During the course of the conversation, he asked, how reliable is the supplier data? How do you validate value chain assumptions? And at what point of time does ESG failure become an investment risk rather than a compliance issue? Now, that conversation stayed with me, and I'm sure this is going to stay with you as well, because this doesn't just reinforce something very important. ESG value chains are no longer a sustainability conversation. They are an investment. You're investing in your time out here. It's about risk, it's about enterprise value creation. And we'd come up with a publication recently, the Global Risk Atlas, where we'd mapped many of these ships, the movement of supply chains, regulatory conversions, friction, geopolitical recalibration, the increasing centrality of India in global commerce. Now, the India EU agreement that I'm sure you all are reading about today, it sits very squarely at that intersection of opportunity and complexity. But what reinforces it is a fundamental truth. Value creation. This is no longer confined within organizational boundaries. This travels. This travels across suppliers, jurisdictions, data systems, and governance structures. That is why today's discussion on value chain for ESG is not about reporting. This is about risk. This is about resilience. And this is about long-term value. And let me just briefly ground today's discussion. When we talk about ESG today, most organizations are reasonably comfortable with scope one and scope two. What happens within their direct operations? That's scope one and scope two. But the real complexity, when you look at it, and the real risk lies in the value chain. Your upstream suppliers, your logistics and transportation value chain system, usage of products, end of life treatment, finance emissions, and investments, and so on and so forth. In many of these sectors, about 70 to 90% of the ESG impact really sits in the value chain. And this is where the data quality breaks down, accountability becomes unclear, the regulatory scrutiny is also increasing. And most importantly, the investors and lenders are paying attention. So today's discussion is not so much about whether ESG matters. It is about how organizations are practically navigating ESG across their supply chains, sector by sector. Now, before I introduce my panel, I just want to take a quick pulse of the room. And may I just request all of you to please put yourselves on mute? It's a very important discussion. Please put yourself on mute. And if I can just request the organizers to put up the first poll question, let's just get a pulse of the room. So you can click any one of these. May I just please request everyone to please put yourselves on mute? Thank you. So there's a huge diversity of responses that are actually coming up. Excellent. There are about 30 responses. I'll just wait for another 30 seconds, allowing everyone to just put down which sector closely resembles where their organization works. Let's move on. So we have a very strong and diversified panel today. This panel represents financial services, manufacturing, technology, and ESG advisory, which is exactly what a value chain discussion demands. Let me start with Manish Kumar, who's the head for ESG and CSR at ICICI Bank. So Manish has over 3 years of experience across manufacturing, banking. He's had various international risk roles in Singapore, in London. He currently leads the ESG and CSR for one of India's largest financial institutions, and he serves on SEBI's ESG Advisory Committee. Manish is a chartered accountant. He's been with the ICICI Bank and the group, in fact, for more than 25 years, of which 12 years he spent as being a part of the international management groups, as I said, based in Singapore and London. And he's responsible for implementing the policy framework and leading the action plan for sustainability. He is also a member of IBA's Standing Committee of ESG. And, he's, of course, a regular contributor with articles, and he mentors university students in India and globally. So welcome, Manish. Welcome to the panel, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Monish, and good afternoon, and thank you, organizers, for having me.
Okay, I would like to just move on to Mayura Busari, who's the head for ESG and investor relations at the Kirloskar Group. She has close to 20 years of experience providing leadership to teams and organizations. She's been working with CEOs and CFOs and the key members of the management team in order to develop. May I please request everyone to please put yourselves on mute? Could I just request everyone to please put yourselves on mute? So Mayura oversees long-term budgetary planning and cost management in alignment with her company's goals. She has hands-on experience in handling sustainability practices at the Kirloskar Group. She works with internal teams, external partners, key stakeholders that we spoke about earlier. She essentially has been identifying and implementing innovative solutions that address environmental challenges, that foster social inclusion, and that seek to uphold the highest value of governance. And so, Mayura, thank you for being here with us. Good afternoon to you.
Thank you, Manish, for that introduction, and thank you for having me on the panel.
Yeah, and thank you, Mayura. And Chitra, who I met in Bangalore for the first time, I'd heard a lot about her. I met her in December. She is the Senior Vice President and Global Head for ESG at Persistent, over 25 years of experience, a well-known professional She's worked across services and manufacturing. She's led ESG initiatives for global organizations like Cognizant, Mindtree, Wipro, IBM, and G. Chitra, found her to be very, very knowledgeable. The conversations I've had with her have been intellectually very stimulating. She has extensive knowledge and experience in various areas of sustainability, diversity, inclusion, equal opportunity, human rights, women empowerment, health and well-being. She's associated with various industry forums such as NASSCOM, CII, IFMA, and is also a member of several knowledge committees of various industry associations and NGOs. And she leads the ESG strategy in a global technology organization, Persistent, where data, people, and supply chains they intersect in many ways. She strategizes and integrates the ESG value creation at Persistent across different stakeholders. She works closely with business leaders to articulate an ESG strategy that's directly aligned with the business goals. And from my conversations with her, I gathered that she believes doing small things that create meaningful change with measurable outcomes are extremely, extremely important because collectively they shape the way for the larger things. She has a BE in environmental engineering from Mysore University and also a diploma in sustainability and CSR from the Sweden Institute of Management. So thank you very much, Chitra, for being on our panel today, and good afternoon to you.
Thank you, Manish. Thanks for having me in the panel.
Right, let me turn to Supriya. Supriya and I work very closely, and she is a wonderful person. She's a chartered accountant. So she's not wonderful because she's a chartered accountant. She's wonderful because she's a wonderful person. But she's also a chartered accountant, and she's a chartered management accountant from the UK. A lot of knowledge, specializing in sustainability. She's a partner with AVA Insights, with whom we have a collaboration for ESG, and she leads our combined global ESG and sustainability advisory practice. She's a seasoned finance professional, sustainability leader, brings a lot of passion, strong blend of strategic insight, regulatory experience, and practical implementation experience. Why do I say that? Because I've seen her lead and oversee 250 GHG inventories and carbon footprint assessments. She's supported more than 40 organizations across multiple sectors, across different states in India, over 9 states. And really, the role that she's been playing is to help them strengthen ESG compliance, disclosures, and transition strategies. She does a lot of work in carbon credits, market sustainability, and ESG reporting. And under her leadership, we have delivered over 50 successful ESG and sustainability engagements while building long-term partnerships. She is a frequent speaker in platforms like CII, of course, webinars like this, AIIFA and MRAI. And, she's works closely with business leaders and associations and also policymakers to advance responsible growth, creditable ESG disclosures, and measurable climate impact. So, Supriya, I know that your throat is not too good, but I don't think that's going to stop you from giving us good value. But welcome to the panel.
Thanks, Manish. Look forward to hearing from everyone or all my co-panelists. Good afternoon, everyone.
And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Manish Chatrath. I work extensively with boards and leadership teams on risk governance and ESG transformation, particularly when ESG intersects with enterprise value and decision making. Now, that brings me to my second question for the poll. If you could, in fact, just hold on to the second poll question. Let me just ask the panelists a question each, and then we'll bring up the second poll question. So, Manish, my first question is for you. For the BFSI sector, upstream and downstream value creation partners like providers of goods and services and borrowers are very critical from the ESG perspective. The question is, how is the BFSI sector making use of BRSR in the sustainable journey?
So, of course, as compared to the, manufacturing and the industrial sector, the services sector is, a little differently placed. And therefore, our reliance on BRSR for assessment or evaluation of value chain is not restricted to BRSR. We have to actually go beyond BRSR, because a lot of our, upstream service provider, upstream value chain partners are actually in the services sector, considering the nature of our business itself. It's not more about goods and services where, the parameters, if you look at the BRSR, they are quantitative on emissions, they are quantitative on a lot of, other parameters on circularity and, gender. For us, we have to actually evaluate more on the governance aspects of the value chain providers, because how they perform on that. Like say, for example, in terms of labor practices, in terms of work-related accidents, incidents. I'll give you a simple example. I remember this distinctly, and it came up in our internal discussion. There was a press, photo where they showed a man cleaning the facade of our one of our buildings, and while the man was actually fully harnessed, etc., it was safe. But there was a news item saying that, is this getting adequately evaluated in organizations? However, the building was, one of the offices, popular offices of ICICI Bank, and people started reading it as if it was a news item pertaining to ICICI Bank. So there are two aspects to it. One, we have to look at the reputation attached to, what the value chain providers uh, provide to us in terms of services. Number two, our responsibility as an extended arm, whether they have adequate practices, do they follow the laws of the land, do they have really people who understand, these governance aspects, how critical it is, are they being able to manage data, are they being able to manage information in terms of cyber risks? Do they have proper governance aspects in terms of independence of the boards? Because again, a lot of the service providers that we have today, they are from the unorganized sector. They are MSMEs. So there is also that governance issue of, whether they are able to disassociate. The promoters are able to disassociate themselves from the from running the business and taking responsible decisions for the business. So those are some of the things that we have to look at. We also have to handhold them in terms of making them understand why these things are important. So one is that through contracts, we can put clauses, etc. People do sign on the dotted line, but it goes much beyond BRSR. So I wanted to highlight that from a banking sector perspective, uh, we have to take on a larger role in getting our service providers onboarded, getting them to understand our ethos, getting them to understand our risk and compliance culture, uh, making them understand that being a regulated entity, and I would say a heavily regulated entity, we have two regulators, the Reserve Bank of India and SEBI as a capital market regulator. We have to ensure that they are able to understand the requirements uh, where we are positioned. So I wanted to highlight it's much more beyond BRSR. Monish, you are mute.
Thank you, Manish. And what you have said resonates with me because I think 6 to 8 years back, I was at a traffic light in New Delhi, and in in those times, you would pick up newspapers off the vendors on the street. And there was a small little child who came to sell me, and I won't name the newspaper, that newspaper. And I just said to myself, I said, here is such a creditable organization, and here's a child who should be in school, not on the roads selling a newspaper. So that incident that you spoke about, completely unintentional and well intended, but obviously reputation does matter. We're already about 22 minutes into the webinar, and I intentionally wanted to jump straight in the heat of the discussions. I will be asking the other panelists questions as well, maybe 2 or 3 rounds. But if any of you have any questions that you would like to place, please put it on the chat, and we'll be able to address it. And of course, there will be, towards the end, the last 20-25 minutes, we will have a specific Q&A session. But if you have anything on your mind, please do put it up on the chat, and we will, of course, raise it to the respective panelists. So from BFSI, let me move straight into manufacturing. And I'm looking at you, Mayura. You're seeing a lot in terms of ESG and the influence of ESG in enhancing your competitiveness, in terms of winning customers, entering new markets, maintaining preferred supplier status. Or the question really for you is the impact of all of this still mostly on compliance and risk management, or other areas that you are also looking at as you spearhead the ESG strategy implementations?
Yeah, sure. So let's see, as you rightly pointed out, Monish, manufacturing sector is in the heat of the ESG, also from the point of compliance as well as point of overall contributor, in especially if we look at Principle 6 and the environmental aspect of the ESG. So let us admit that customer preferences are changing, be it domestic customers or international customers. The conversations do include sustainability parameters. The conversations do evolve around the carbon footprint of the product, how the carbon, emissions can be made less, and helping our customers to decarbonize their journey. That also conversations are evolving. I would admit it that market access is easier if you are way ahead in your ESG journey. So, be it compliance or something voluntarily that you do, and if you put it in the public domain and talk about it in the customer meetings, that's helping. As you all aware, the manufacturing sectors has gone into the phases. There are days where manufacturing made more economic sense to backwardly integrate our supply chains. So in that era, there have been a lot of acquisitions or business expansions that we did as a group, wherein if we are an engine manufacturing company, we started a company which is into castings. If we are a casting company, we went back and started our own pig iron furnaces. And now taking it back, since we have our pig iron furnace, we are going back to the even acquiring iron ore mines. So that way, more and more value chain is under coming our radar. And at the same time, we are conscious of inclusive growth. So not just E portion of the ESG, but if you look at the social portion of the ESG, we are looking for a growth which is sustainable for us as well as our value partners. So a lot of decisions in manufacturing sectors, be it on the supplier acquisition side, are also run by economic principle, that putting renewable energy makes more sense, tracking your energy bills makes more sense, and keeping my value chain closer to my vicinity makes more sense because that reduces my logistical upstream emissions. So these discussions are very much interesting and very much happening and increasing the competitiveness of the business as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayura. When I got off the station in Paris, or when the Eurostar was just, coming in, and I was reminded of that when you were speaking, there was an announcement, and the announcement said, "Thank you for taking the greener way to travel." So if I'd taken an aircraft, I don't know how much I would have polluted, or the aircraft would have polluted the environment, but taking that train obviously meant, and you spoke about engines, and I was reminded of that. So, well, there is no short train from Pune to Bangalore. We'll have to take a flight. So I'm taking that flight. All of us are, Chitra, to where you are in Bangalore. And the next question is for you. From your vantage point at Persistent, Chitra, how should organizations architect their ESG technology stack so that the ESG data is not just collected, it becomes audit ready, it becomes automation driven, it becomes regulator defensible across operations and your extended supply chains? And just a leading question there, if I may, what are the non-negotiable design principles for building such a ESG nervous system?
Thank you, Manish, and I think you landed in Bangalore. So ESG performance is mostly, referred as non-financial indicators. So mostly all of us are aware of the organization financial indicators, which contributes to EBITDA, which contributes to, revenue, profit and loss statement. And most of us are comfortable in doing that from the time the company has started or the operations has begun. But most often the ESG performance data is neglected, right? Either it comes at the backstage or trying to retrofit somebody when someone is asking, either the regulator or the customers or investors. So according to us, enterprise must design the ESG technology stack the same way they design their financial systems, which is more controlled, repeatable, and assurance ready. And of course, it has to build in reference to certain global standard, because in ESG, if you look at today, the accounting, carbon accounting itself is, evolving. The maturity is also, not that very strong. Of course, we know that this is a evaluation phase to reach a maturity phase. Of course, the standards are getting regulated. In India, it's a good news. Now we have BRSR. Until BRSR, we just used to follow whatever our customers were asking or the investors were asking, right? And then we at Persistent, what we feel is, it is, I mean, as you rightly put, everything is connected to the nervous system of the technology architect or the technology platform which we develop. The first, what I can say, is a sensory layer. The ESG data must be captured where the activity occurs, and it cannot be retrofitted later. So if we get that right, as a sensory layer. So what do you mean by that? The ESG tag, should integrate with the enterprise systems, the core enterprise system like HRMS, travel, procurement, EHS. All the systems are already available in the organization. It's only that we need to integrate all of the system to come together so that the data gets sensed from various platforms. IT governance and information security system is much available in the IT organization or any other organization, because this is the core of the business. And all the governance which we do with data privacy, all the GRI indicators which is asking about the customer data, data privacy related, can be easily integrated. And of course, the supplier and platform partners ka platform, which is part of our value chain. In many cases, it's still not integrated. Even in our case, we have not done it 100%. So there are stages, multiple stages. Right now, we have integrated the ERP system platform, which is our customer ERP systems are still not integrated. So there is a lot whole thing to do. The second one, what I call it as a reflex layer, the moment you get into that reflex, right? What is my broader risk, from the various framework, whatever I've already integrated or sensed, what is the risk, or how much is the appetite of the ESG risk, so it comes with the, evidence tagging, documentation, log, certification, change log, version controls, all that has to be integrated to arrive at a overall ESG risk at the enterprise level. And the third one, what I call it as a spinal cord, to put it in a layman language, spinal cord is actually the backbone of the entire system, from metric to source, from methodology, from restatements, audit ready, etc., all of that. And the last one is the cognitive layer, which is very, very important. Cognitive layer gives some assurance, that the data, whatever has been collected, audited, is auditable and it is ready. And then it is further linking to a certain, global related risk. For example, when you collect the climate related risk, what do you do with that risk? Can we do a scenario analysis? Can we understand what is the transition risk? Likewise, from a regulatory framework, when you say we have a reputational risk with respect to the regulatory framework, then how is that linked to the various standards of framework which we imbibe, and so on? And lastly, the few principles which are must to do or non-negotiable is, any data which we collect should have some digital traces, should be auditable, then it should have certain controls aligned with certain frameworks, and then of course governance has to be embedded in all of these principles which we talked about.
Thank you, Chitra. And
Monish,
I
if you
saw,
allow me, can I come in here? I'll
yes,
just
sir,
add to
of
what
course.
Chitra has
Yes,
mentioned.
of course, of course.
Now, I would like to just, also highlight how it is different from a banking company. She talked about the sensory system. Now, we have to adopt very high standards of information security, IT security.
Yeah.
And now, of course, we have the DPDP coming in.
Yeah.
There are challenges for integrating some of our existing systems to an ESG platform or ESG tool. It's not as easy. Chitra, of course, put it in a very lucid layman's language, but there are challenges. So,
Yeah,
again, going back to what she mentioned in the last is about the governance aspects, making it audit ready. To some extent, those are some of the challenges that probably even the board members, face. They have to take a call, and then these things get implemented.
right.
Yes, Manisha, thank you very much. And Manisha, I wanted to compliment you because right from 4 o'clock in the morning, my phone rings, and sometimes I have to keep it on because it could be a client, it could be my office. Most of the time, it is calls from bankers who I know the bank, I dealt with the bank, but it's the same thing all over again. And I have a standard legal notice that I have, which I just type for compliance with the DPDP because they don't have permission to call me. You know something, Manish? I do a lot of banking with ICICI Bank, but I don't get any calls from your bank. So there must be something right that you're doing, which perhaps the others I will not take the names that they're not doing. So I just wanted to give you that compliment, Manish.
Thank you. I'll pass it on to the relevant team.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, now I just want to turn to Supriya to help us connect the dots. Now, you're working across different sectors with Meenakshi, with Sarthak, with Chandan, and your team. You're helping companies implement BRSR and value chain ESG. So, Supriya, you're seeing things on the ground across sectors. From what you see on the ground, what needs to change for value chain in ESG? What needs to change for value chain and ESG to move from a nice to have to a core profit and risk driver? Is it better data? Is it better incentives? Is it stronger board ownership? Or is it client? Or is it investor pressure? Is it all of these or more? Over to you, Supriya.
Yeah, thanks, Punish. Thanks, Chitra, also for helping me join the dots now, because she has already covered a very, very important part as technology, which is an important piece here. But, as I'm working across sectors and different companies, what I'm seeing is the mindset. What is the cultural need of driving a company is utmost very, very important. Is, and what is your vision as an ESG, which will drive the whole equation. For some companies, and in India, we work more from a compliance standpoint, right? If there is compliance, we are more eager to do things. And if there is no compliance, then that's not a priority for many of them. Now with value chain coming into the compliance regime in some form or the shape, what I'm seeing is, tone at the top is really, really important. If you leave it to one function in a company to drive it, especially the value chain, it is not going to work because it is a cross-functional role. It is a cross-functional responsibility. I'm working with few companies where a compliance manager is doing his best. But if the tone at the top is not right, whatever good a compliance manager will do, it's not going to work. So if we decide as a company that we have to do value chain, we are not going to procure, or we are at least going to take a very, very strict view from procurement of the companies, from the companies who are not ESG compliant, or giving them some warning signals, encouraging them to do things. It's not going to work. Hence, tone at the top and then putting them into embedded ESG practices is a first cornerstone of a successful value chain journey. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, I will say for some companies, 70 to 80% of the ESG emissions lies in the value chain. Now, if you are saying that you're becoming carbon neutral or you're becoming net zero, and if you're not covering value chain as part of your ESG calculations, at least I think we have to rethink about what are we claiming. Are we really going net zero? So, looking at what scopes you're covering, looking at how important it is to cover scope 3 very, very carefully. And one thing which works very, very well for companies have a KPI driven approach. As Chitra also mentioned in her thing, we have financial parameters as KPIs. Do really we have non-financial metrics as part of KPIs? How much scope 3 reductions we have done across our suppliers? We start monitoring this data. If we start looking at calculating this data, I think it will become an easy exercise for most of the corporates to actually operationalize it. The vision is clear, the thought process is clear. Now it is a time to operationalize it. And the people on the ground, I'm working with many people on the ground doing fantastic jobs. But how do you make your suppliers ready? How do you encompass them into your ecosystem? How do you give them trainings? How do you handle them during the process? Becomes at most very, very important. So this is what Manish, I think a very good point brought. It is an all-rounded approach, I would say. It starts with the boardroom. It starts with incentivizing people. It starts with proper data collection tools through proper technology. And it has to be an overall cultural mindset. A mindset change is what I would say for organizations to make this successful. But having said that, if many of the companies are working with their right technology partners, with their right consultants, this journey I'm seeing for many of them is also becoming seamless. So this is how I would put it, Munish, it's actually in every part on corner of function of the organization. And everyone has to stand together, stand and strong.
Yeah, and it's not, as you rightly said, it's not about doing something new because organizations are doing it, but it's about, like what Chitra also said, it's about connecting the dots and seeing how you can automate. So thank you so much, for that. I want to just take a brief pause and just request the organizers to put up a poll question. If you have it ready, can you just put it up? So it'll be interesting to get everybody's views on that. The question, as I understand, if you can just put it up, please. Lovely. So the question is, at what stage is your organization in its ESG value chain journey? And what is the biggest challenge? So two parts to the question, and therefore you have two parts to the answer as well. You could have started, and you could be seeing a supplier engagement and alignment as an issue. Or you could have started, you might be seeing data collection and accuracy as an issue. You may have partially started, but the roles and responsibilities may be unclear, so that's a challenge. You may not have started because of lack of time, resources, priority, or awareness. So if you could just, click on any one of these, whichever is the closest, please. Yeah, it's good to see 88% have either partially started or started. The challenges are real. And like what Chitra was saying, awareness and prioritization, and like what Supriya also, reconfirmed, the tone at the top. So the tone at the top would obviously be driven by regulations and by investor pressure. And as I speak, I see the numbers fluctuating. So the 88% became 86, and that's where it stays. Okay, wonderful. Now, I just wanted to very quickly come back to you, Manish. You spoke about disclosures. With disclosures come transparency. Where does transparency become the hardest for you? In your vendor ecosystem? Is it in your vendor ecosystem? Is it in your customer ESG risk? Or is it in tracking the real world impact of your financing? And if I may, a second part to the question, What gaps still prevent you from managing these risks proactively, if I may?
So actually, Monish, it's a very pertinent question, and I think we should put it in context, especially in India. I would say large organizations, and especially again, I would focus on large service organization, manufacturing companies, industrial. They started their journey quite some time back, and then when I say quite some time back, it can go as far as back a decade. Now they have not only looked at their own internal practices. They have also then started looking at their ecosystem, which is connected to them. So that includes their value chain partners, upstream, downstream. I am aware a lot of companies, have been hand-holding their value chain partners. They are facilitating things for their value chain partners, not only in terms of being prepared to report, but also in terms of raising the bar on disclosure. So, and again, when I say disclosure, it means a mindset change, which Supriya talked about, where, people have to not only be willing to disclose, but they also need to understand the importance of disclosure on how it is really beneficial to their organization, how in the long run it will impact them positively, not only in terms of better customer engagement or whichever side of the value chain they are, but also in terms of regulatory aspects. And one of the key things to keep in mind is that better disclosure, that means more transparency. Of course, it should be proportionate to the nature of the business, to the size of the organization. But in the long run, and this is something that we have also really realized as an organization, in the medium and long term, it actually defocuses or takes us away from applying too much energy on unwanted issues in an organization. So more transparency also results in our uh, value chain partners, I would say stakeholders, not value chain partners actually. The stakeholders increasingly becoming more and more comfortable dealing with the organization. It leads to seamless, business transactions. So one of the examples just you quoted about this data privacy, you're not getting calls from ICICI Bank, right? So it's a it's less pain point for you as a customer. It is good for us as an organization that things are working. It gives us that assurance, and therefore, getting this kind of feedback, enabling systems, making more and more disclosure. I'll give you one example. One of the parameters under BRSR is about reporting POSH complaints. We have whistleblowing complaints, POSH complaints. Initially, there was a hesitation. If I disclose these numbers and if the numbers increase, what then what? Gradually, we came around to the conclusion that actually, if the numbers go up, that means our systems are working. It means that people are more confident to report. It means that people are comfortable with the grievance redressal mechanisms that we have put in place. Let the numbers go up. It doesn't matter. As long as we are able to address the issue, that is what we have to look at. So these are some of the things that we have to keep in mind when we are making disclosures. Similarly, when we talk about gender pay parity, we should not start looking at the end result. What is my disclosure going to be? What we should be looking at are the trends and the learnings that we have from the disclosure. In case, suppose it is adverse, what is it that we need to put in place to rectify the situation, portray ourselves as being more responsive and being more responsible towards that particular uh, matter or issue. So this is how I look at transparency and disclosure. Over a period of time, again, we have realized initially, I came into this role about 3.5 years ago. My engagements with our investors on ESG would go for 60 minutes, 75 minutes. Today, my calls end within 30 minutes. The reason being that now more and more data is available in the public domain. So I think this is very important for all the stakeholders, including our value chain partners.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Manish. Mayura, you have done a fantastic job in interacting with a diversified set of people with relative levels of awareness in terms of ESG internally and externally. So, which part of the extended chain is the hardest to get visibility into? Is it tier two? Is it tier three suppliers? And which areas? Is it labor practices? Is it emissions? And where do you see the biggest opportunity to move?
Yeah. So let me be upfront. So scope three for us is scope one, scope two for our value chain. So scope one, scope two to the extent is still easier to explain to the value chain partners since it's within their boundaries, essentially electricity bills and the fuel consumption. However, there are certain areas which are more softer in aspect, as you rightly pointed out, labor practices. There are ways to collect the data. There are ways to verify the data. We do a lot of surprise supplier audits to check what is written in the contract is to the extent actually performed on the ground. So there is still a lot of data reliability which is on indirect relationship. Here, please maintain, we have to maintain a balance wherein we don't have to appear like over controlling on how they are controlling their workforce. At the same time, just maintaining that friendliness so that, this is more from, being inclusive. This is more from, let's say, even a simple practice as human rights and as Manish also spoke about, posh complaints being tracked even in the supply chain are really very softer aspects and need to be handled trickily. Thankfully, our supply chain practices go back at least 10 to 15 years, where we have put a systems in place where instead of being intrusive, we want to appear as we are building capacities and we are here to help rather than just policing on what our suppliers are doing. So it is very important to maintain that balance. And on the quantitative data, if you look at economic decisions, especially in the SMEs and MSMEs type of suppliers, their digitization level is limited. Also, there is lack of ESG awareness. Let's say if I have a person standing on a CNC machine whose job is to deliver X number of machined parts by day, he is least aware of what is my ESG footprint is, or rather he is not even knowing what is the ESG footprint. So that's where I think awareness programs help, making that person understand that switching off machine or using a variable drive to limit your electricity consumption actually adds value for us being a customer of our value chain partners. So again, I'll point out that as a capacity building and awareness sessions are more important while handholding these tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. And then again, finding a balance between policing and controlling their labor practices is a very key to handling this supply chain very responsibly.
And you do that very well. You do that very well. Um, Before we move on, just a quick observation. How many of you have realized today that there are three extremely talented women presenting and two relatively talented men also presenting? So I don't know about balance sheets, but we seem to have got our ESG fundas right. Isn't that right, Manish? That's a strong signal to everyone.
Absolutely.
Yes. I
Right.
don't know
And with
whether it
that,
was by design or by default.
uh, it's happened, and that's the ESG signal. So we believe in practicing what we preach, absolutely. And I think, there we are. So let me just come back to you, Chitra, with my second question. We were discussing in Bangalore also in your office, and you also gave a perspective saying that you need to make the transition. You want to see organizations make the transition from ESG initiatives, not behaving like compliance projects, but moving into, I think the term that you used was enterprise platforms. Now, the question really is, what does it practically mean to platformize platformize, if I can use that term, ESG to embed automated controls? Uh, yeah, how much do you look at continuous supplier compliance monitoring? What are the real-time ESG risk signals that you would look at? Where does procurement and reporting systems come in? You mentioned nervous system. ESG is actually a living operating layer. And I know for you, it is that and not a reporting afterthought. But do you want to give some perspectives there in terms of some best practices, perhaps that you've been implementing so successfully?
Yeah. Thanks, Monish. And before I start, all of us, mostly we relate that ESG initiatives today are even the intentioned ones, they always behave like projects. For example, let's say I'm building a facility and then probably I need to source a particular material. Okay, can I look at eco-friendly material which has low carbon footprint, etc., all of that? Many a times, the thinking or based on the commercial or from the, techno commercial viability and other things, this get into the backstage. So mostly they have a start date and the end date, and they live outside the core business systems. Then they wake up once in a year, just for the time of sake of reporting, etc., all of that. But for us in Persistent, what we are trying to do is exactly, platform, putting a platform, where we can start tracking all of this. And if you ask me, it was very difficult for us in the initial stage. For example, when we brought all our suppliers for a training, ESG awareness training, and most of the people who are tagged in the ERP are not the ESG guys. They are the sales people or the business development guys. So when we sent an email, everybody joined the sessions, they sat for 1 hour, they went through the training program, etc., all of that. Post that when we sent the questionnaire, all of them replied back to saying that we are not ESG expert, we don't have expertise in ESG. I'm not an ESG Spock, etc., all of that. So that is the mistake what we did in the beginning, then we had to, learn from our mistakes, then go back to every organization, ask them to come back with the ESG Spock within the enterprise. And then we did one more training sessions to all of them. And for us, what we have started doing is we started moving this as part of a core systems. For examples, we have ERP systems. We track based on the spend. We track based on the asset, energy, and travel. So where is my biggest carbon emissions coming from? What is the biggest investment I'm doing today, and how much of carbon, or the dollar investment I'm doing to abate the carbon. So for example, we are carbon neutral now. The only idea for going for carbon neutral is to we neutralize our carbon as well as every year, as well as have a net zero, targets validated by SBTi by 2050. So when we do that, we know how much of carbon we need to decarbonize our growth year on year. Why not select our suppliers, who can actually help us navigate in this journey? And this was, it's still very hard to track this. If you look at by our spend, by top 2%, contributing to the highest spend, if you go by BRSR, criterias, not many suppliers come there. For us, it's just hardly, 10, 50 people. Unlike manufacturing, it is many more. And when you go to the deep dive to the value chain, the smaller organization or the services is, for example, let's say I want 5 laptops. There is a middleman who will give me a competitive, pricing, and they supply the 5 laptops. It may not be, as a product which will give me a lesser carbon. Then we said, okay, no, we came out saying that no, we need a particular product which has so and so specifications, and then user has to demand that particular product from the procurement. So what I say is, it all has to flow back into the enterprise architecture. It has to flow back into the systems. Then only, a lot of things will happen. Otherwise, it will continue to be a project, continue to be reporting at the end of the year. So, and then a couple of things which I wanted to highlight also is within the ERP and procurement, supplier ESG checks are triggered automatically. So we have built in a system, as soon as the invoice has to be paid or submitted by the vendor. Giving an example of simple on the social part is they have to submit the minimum wages receipt which they have paid to their employees. They have to submit certain labor related, either it could be leave transaction or either it could be bonus transactions, etc. They have to submit as part of the statutory compliance requirement before we process the invoice itself. Likewise, even for a supplier diversity, when we track supplier diversity, right, we do track for the certificates. We ask an MSCMI person to submit the certificate before, women-led organization before, or a, PWD-led organization before. This is for us to know that how our suppliers are diverse, and where are the tracks and the spends we are doing with our suppliers. So, I mean, this is still in a nascent stage, not that we are matured there, but at least, from the discussions what I have with our procurement, we are trying to regulate these practices somewhere as a centralized process.
Thank you, Chitra. These were really very good practical insights, and I know it's very challenging. And that's what brings me to Supriya. That Supriya, you see this across clients, you see this across sectors. From your perspective, what are the most common blind spots, if I can use the term, that organizations have in their value chain? That's the first part of the question. And the second one is a little tricky. What areas tend to reveal more complexity as organizations go deeper in the value chain?
Yeah, thanks, Manish. So, for many of the companies, and today many of them who are on the call, and we saw in the poll earlier during the start of the session, companies are in a different stage of the maturity phase on value chain. So with due respect to all companies who have, entered into this aspect of value chain, the focus now is on the tier one suppliers, right? Because the data from them is possibly easy to get. And they've started the journey with that. But if you see about the risk, if you see about the controls, if you see about the labor practices with Mayura mentioned, even Manish mentioned, and Chitra did mention in our conversation, there will be more risk with tier 2 suppliers and tier 3 suppliers. They also become an important part of this journey. But as companies are progressing to this phase, nowadays the more concentration is to get data and report data on what is easily available, easily got from your tier 1, rather than looking at the risk which is lying in tier 2 and tier 3. So one blind spot which I do advise companies is, while BRSR does say about 2%, does say about 75%, that's a good start. But if you are considering ESG in a true sense, you need to look at the risk which you are reporting. So this was one of the important area which I would ask companies that not during phase 1, but do be carry of this, do be aware of this, and incorporate it in some form or the other as part of your process chain, right? So this would really become, a moot point to manage your ESG risk and controls effectively. So when they are also started collecting data, when they are reporting it, the data maturity from the companies, the data cleanliness from the companies which they are getting is very, very difficult to maneuver. You need to be clear what you have been asking and what the companies on your value chain partners are giving to you. So handholding them throughout the journey, helping them understand what is required is an important and moot point in a successful value chain journey, which we are doing with many of our clients. So this is what, Monish, I would like to pause here and put this thought in front of the audience and rethink and help them rethink on these 3-4 data points which I have mentioned. Yeah.
Thank you, Supriya. Thank you so much, and useful. Can we have the third poll question, please? Over the next 12 months, what will be your biggest ESG value chain priority? Getting reliable supply data, we've heard that. Embedding ESG into procurement, or preparing for audits and scrutiny, any one of these. Okay, thank you. I think there was a question that one of the participants had put up. So let me just read the question, and I will have a separate set of questions also, the last one. And the question was how CFOs and controllers should embed sustainability metrics, uh, into the mainstream financial reporting cycle without overburdening the existing processes. I think that's a very good question. Whoever's asked the question, thank you for asking the question, Ramataneja. I'll give you my perspective, and then, of course, I think any one of our panelists can, add on to that. So I think it's important to start from where the data already exists. I think that's the important thing. Uh, you shouldn't really look in terms of creating parallel ESG systems because most sustainability data already lives in the financial adjacent processes. We heard, Chitra also talk about that. What are these, processes? They could be procurement, where you have supplier data, spend contracts. You could have operations where you are tracking energy, water, wastage. HR, where you're tracking your workforce, your safety, your diversity, and risks and compliances. So the discipline therefore lies in mapping, not collecting. The other important element is to start treating sustainability metrics like financial controls, not reports. How do you do this? You can embed a small set of metrics into monthly closes, management dashboards, and even capital allocation reviews. So if it doesn't influence a decision, it doesn't belong there. That's the, sort of golden rule that you can look at. The third one would be to focus on decision useful metrics and not something which is an exhaustive disclosure checklist. So for finance teams, the priorities could be cost volatility, emanating from energy, carbon, supply disruption, revenue risk, which could be from the customer specific ESG requirements, capital access, which could be from lender and investor expectations. So 3 to 5 metrics, according to me, that move these levers enough are good to start. The other one you could do is you could align your ESG metrics to existing performance cycles. You can avoid new reporting calendars. So instead, what you can start doing is you can start reviewing your ESG metrics alongside your quarterly forecasts. You can link them to CapEx approvals and ROI discussions. You can also integrate them into enterprise-wide risk reviews. So then sustainability will become a part of how decisions are made and not an additional task. Automation and selective automation, not aggressive, is also a desirable path because digitization will help, but only after clarity. What do I mean by this? Start with simple things like simple data pulls from the ERP and procurement systems. Clear ownership is important with accountability. And you can retain manual controls where judgment really matters. So the point that I'm trying to make with this is that automation should follow maturity and not precede it. Now, the CFO mindset shift is important. Sustainability works best in finance when it's treated as a risk and a value lens, not as a reporting obligation. And when it's embedded this way, it'll reduce friction rather than simply add to it. So that's my, perspective, but happy to hear the other panelists, give their views on this question that was asked.
Monish, if you permit, may I add?
Yes, sir. Of course, please.
So, the reason I took it up is I report actually to the group CFO of our organization. So ESG is very much part and parcel of the, reporting line of the CFO. You have very lucidly articulated the areas. I thank you for that. I'll just give you an example what we did in our organization when we had to start reporting BRSR code. BRSR, of course, is a congregation of various parameters. BRSR core has specific parameters which are linked to financial reporting. So actually what we did is we actually looked at our existing financial reporting, our existing P&L statements, our existing cash flow statements, and picked up parameters which would facilitate us to report on BRSR code. So that was our starting point. And coming back to your point where probably we should look at the existing data, try to really identify what is helpful in terms of reporting, and then automation comes as a second step. Once we are confident that yes, this is the right data, this is the right source, and a source which will be consistently available in the organization. The number two aspect is, I think we all need to understand that financial reporting today gives a lot of confidence to our external stakeholders, because there is an concurrent audit, there is statutory audit, there is financial, and now increasingly accountability of the accountants is also increasing internally and externally. So starting with financial reporting parameters, I think, is a good way to start ESG reporting.
Sure. Thank you, Manish. Anybody else would like to add a perspective?
Thanks, Manish. Likewise, I also report into the CFO organization. When we initially started at looking all these KPIs, BRSR has core and essential and leadership indicators. Then one simple question which CFO asked me was, everything we already have in the system, it's only about representation. It's only about what to report, and not, it doesn't call to be, everything needs to be reported, whatever it's asking. So we have to make a conscious choice on what needs to be reported, which is material to the organization, which is material to our stakeholders, investors, or our customers, and start reporting which is mandatory, and non-mandatory you can take a call, based on the materiality. So this is how we started.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just to add on what Chitra said, in manufacturing sector, the boundaries are very clear because a lot of ESG decisions are cost competitive as well. Because if I'm looking at my scope 1, scope 2 emissions, it is fuel and electricity data, which is the in-process fuel and electricity, which is already in the systems. These, if you look at a power bill of a company, that's where you will see where the scope 2 emissions are lying. If you're looking at fuel consumption, so a lot of this system, a lot of the data is already available in the ERP. It is about connecting the dot and making a right connection. So this is very much quantifiable, very much measurable, and even the KPIs can be set with the right teams.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Right. Supriya, any perspective before I
will put my comment on chat in the interest of time. I will reply to Raman. You can continue.
Lovely. Okay. So, Manish, we've heard you, highlight specific intricacies, that you're dealing with. My question now is very specific to infrastructure. You need infrastructure. What infrastructure are you building now in data, risk models, or governance? Because really what you spoke about was embedding ESG into operations, which is credit appraisal, portfolio monitoring, disclosures. And we spoke about, and you yourself, gave a perspective of integrating it rather than running it as a parallel reporting exercise. So the question is, what infrastructure are you building now?
So let me divide this into two parts. One is the evaluation of our borrowers, because for us that is also very important. What is the kind of portfolio that we are building? Are we really supporting as a financial institution? Are we really greening the economy, to say so, if I may use the word? How are we supporting that initiative of the government of India? So there are certain parameters which were already embedded into our credit risk evaluation. It's only now that we have to start looking at it from a different lens called ESG. So, for example, the ability of the management to govern. If I look at the governance parameters, we talk about independence of the board. We talk, about how some of the things are really embedded as culture in the organization. How does the board react to certain situations? Say, for example, there is a legal claim against the company. Are they really willing to allow minority shareholders exercise their rights in terms of voting, etc.? These are some of the parameters which we were already assessing as part of our credit evaluation. As I mentioned, it will take form of ESG governance when I'm doing an evaluation. Similarly, when I talk about business risks and strategy, are the companies really looking at their business models differently as climate events are impacting them? So we do have actual cases, live situations where labor force is unable to report to work due to high heat stress or due to flooding situations. how is the company really facilitating things for their workforce. That again, impacts the business ability to business, the business strategy going forward. Now, these are some of the new things that we have to start looking at. It has to have a sector-wise approach. Of the sectors do get impacted more than some other sectors. So we need to really assess what is the kind of differential lens and approach that we need to take. The third aspect is the impact of policies, and this is what we call as an industry phenomenon. The company, even the best of the companies in a particular industry could behave differently to situations like changes in policies. It could be internal to the country, it could be even be external. Say, for example, the imposition of carbon tax by EU and probably UK going forward, which is popularly known as a CBAM. Now, a lot of companies in different sectors did get impacted. How did they react to it? Did they embrace it? Did they really take actions to start collating data, reporting data, take positive action so that the impact of that particular tax is lower on their business? These are some of the things also that we have started evaluating. So some of these things have become new parameters when we do our credit evaluation. Having said that, currently for the banks and financial institutions, assessment of, if I would say, ESG parameters is happening separately. It's not completely embedded into the credit rating models that we have. One of the primary reasons, or other, I would say two reasons. One is that we ourselves are in that journey of learning. We are also expecting the companies to mature on these aspects so that they are able to collate data and report better. The second aspect is about the regulatory framework. So again, as a banking company, we are regulated by the Reserve Bank of India, and we expect the Reserve Bank of India to come up with a standard framework so that the banks and non-bank finance companies have a level playing field. It's as simple as if, one bank asks 5 questions and another bank asks 10 questions to a borrower, where the borrower will really go to. So therefore, having a level playing field through regulation is also important. While these assessments are happening for the borrowers, they have not yet got fully embedded into the credit risk model. So that is one part. The second part is actually the calculation of emissions. And the reason I highlight that is for bank and non-bank finance companies, financed emissions, which is category 15 of scope 3, is actually the most important part of our total emissions. So if I say for banking companies, 97 to 98% of our total emissions is actually coming from financed emissions. So what is the data readiness of the companies? How are the various frameworks evolving to calculate the emissions? How are we capturing data in our internal systems to facilitate the calculations? That is another area which we are looking at. We are developing models. We are trying to understand, what are the emission factor data sources. We are trying to understand what are the, there is a framework known as the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, PCAF, which is currently the globally accepted framework for calculating financed emissions. So what is the data accuracy there? What are the data sources there? How are we enabling the borrowers to report data? So this is something that we are working on. So we are working on both aspects, credit risk as well as financed emissions. It's a journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. It's a journey. And Mayura, we spoke about infrastructure. The question that I want to ask you is about your investments that you may be making in traceability tools, maybe digital MRB systems or contractual mechanisms with vendors. The idea is to ensure data quality. And that's the theoretical part of the question. The practical part of the question is, and I know you'll be honest in saying that, how hard has that been in practice?
Yeah. So, see, the key is, that Manish also rightly said, is the focus is to build a credible decision grade ESG data systems as well as a governance structure around it. Now, when I say a decision based ESG, one is it's for our own operations. Second, embedding the supply chain data or value chain partners data into it. And third, at the fag end of it, as we being a value chain partner for our customers. So the whole system should be able to deliver this input as well as output requirements, and at the same time not putting a data fatigue on the system, because at the end of the day it's the same data of electricity, water, waste, your diversity, and let's say human resource data. The same data is being presented in a different manner at the so the people who are providing that data shouldn't feel data fatigue, that for 5 reports I'm reaching out to them 5 times and getting the same data again and again. So building this middle layer with digital applications and digital tools is what we are focusing on. We have been able to do it for our systems. This will be our first year for extending it to our value chain partner. We plan to leverage our existing ecosystem, which we have developed over the years, Kirloskar being a very seasoned player into this game. So this is our focus. So the same data taken from value chain partners being presented to the board for the decision, being presented to our customers for their value chain requirements. And at the same time, it is very important to notice that regulations are moving faster and investors are looking beyond narrative. So if I were to present this data, BRSR core data, to my investors and different reporting authorities like CBAM is coming, the CCTS scheme, government is putting pressure, plant-wise carbon reduction schemes. So this data has to be traceable. This data, if there are various type of audit, needs to be audit ready, and then simplifying it to the data owners. So that is our focus. It's a learning journey. I would say we have been able to put our numbers in place, and this will be our first year to go to our value chain partners too.
Sure. Thank you, Mayura. So, Chitra, Mayura has been able to ensure that her numbers are in place. Your staffing agencies are mostly small enterprises. How many will actually invest in ESG data infrastructure? How many will provide you with rough estimates? And when you do get that inconsistent data across, let's say, 1,000+ agencies, how will you report it in BRSR?
I don't have an answer for this for how many, but I can truly say that it is not many. They will not expect, or we can't expect them to suddenly behave like large corporates with ESG data infrastructure, and that is very unrealistic and unnecessary also. So what is important for us to start with is instead of a perfect data, we can start with controlled data, where most small and mid-sized staffing partners will not invest in any of the big data platform or infrastructure platforms in the near term. So we can templatize the data template for them, asking them what is relevant for us, from a materialistic perspective to the organization. We can devise the template, standardize the format for them and get the data collected. So I view, in our organization, we view the data in 3 ways. One, whether it is classified clearly as measured, or whether it is estimated or proxy based, because that is the key for transparency. Even when we are reporting in BRSR, no, it's very clearly talks about what is the coverage of your disclosure, what percentage of suppliers are covered, what categories of suppliers are included, whether the estimates or proxies are being used, and what is your methodology for disclosures. When any auditor is doing an assurance audit, we still don't know, even the auditors themselves do not know how to audit the value chain. For the BRSR reporting, it's still very vague and nascent stage, etc. So we are all just talking about, even when you're doing doing an audit, when you're doing an assurance, what are you going to look for, other than the core indicators data, what is that, whether it's going to be at the aggregate level, whether it's going to be at an individual supplier level or a category-wise suppliers. So how do we do this grouping, etc., all of that? For an IT organization, we don't have tier 2, tier 3, right? Because you don't have downstream partners or the supply chain. So it's a big, Pandora box for us still, but at least what we have started with the controlled data, at least we know what are the data sets we need to report and how controlled they are, and what are the assumptions and the proxies we are going to use for the reporting. And we are very clear what is the baseline year. Baseline year, as also Mayura said, that we are also starting for the first time for the reporting. If you look at the last year BRSR report, we just talked about in terms of awareness and capacity building for our suppliers, but this year we don't know what we will be reporting in the BRSR yet, we are still collecting the data and aggregating that. But the reality or the truth is not many of them will invest in the ESG, platform or the infrastructure. It has to be a journey which has to be, dealt, or it has to be done with the two partners, in cohesive and helping each other to get whatever data we need.
Thank you, Chitra. The Q&A, coincidentally has been open, and I know that there's one question, but if anybody needed that prompt to ask more, please do. Any specific question before I read out the one that is already there in the chat box? Okay, so let me read out the question, which is from Somi. The question is that solar energy is widely recognized as a sustainable solution for decarbonization. However, the sector is now approaching the first significant wave of panel end of life. How should we assess the true sustainability of solar when we consider disposal, recycling, recovery of critical materials? Do effective recycling mechanisms and ERP frameworks currently exist? And are they adequate to address the scale of the upcoming challenge? Further, what role can sustainability practitioners place, both individually and collectively, in an industry in building responsible life cycle solutions? Well, that's a great question. I don't know if it can be answered in 5 minutes, but I'll just give a quick perspective and just open it up to the other panelists. I think there are three parts to the question. My understanding is how to assess the true sustainability across a solar panel's life cycle. So that's the first part of the question. Second part is a candid assessment of current recycling ERP readiness. And the third one is concrete actions, with that sustainability practitioners and the industry should now take, which should be practical, prioritize. So these are the three parts. Now, how to assess the true sustainability of solar? I think, that by itself, and, we can give you a detailed response, but I think the three important aspects, fundamentally bound by the fact that you shouldn't let the low operational emissions of PV blind you to end of life risks, which are EOL risks. A robust assessment must be life cycle wide and decision useful. So you should ideally perform a life cycle assessment with different EOL scenarios. You could have EOL pathways, which are landfill, mechanical, recycling, chemical, recovery, reusage. Then you could include embodied GHCs and material footprints across manufacture. And you could have certain sensitivity test key variables, for example, panel lifetime, recovery rate, so on and so forth. KPIs becomes also important in terms of energy payback time, life cycle, GHG, intensity per kilowatt with EOL included. Material recovery rate is important. So there are other aspects as well. Accounting for hidden impacts, for example, hazardous components in older panels, for example, lead in some in some backsheet, sort of information. Contamination is another one. Cross-border EOL is another one. So I think these are some, important aspects I want to just place before you. Difficult really to expand beyond that. Are recycling mechanisms and EPR frameworks adequate? The simple answer is no. The landscape is improving. but there are certain key realities that need to also be factored in. What should sustainability practitioners and industry do? That's a very, sort of important question. It depends on organization to organization, but the exposure has to be mapped. The EOL has to be integrated into procurement and contracts. Measurable targets need to be set. So we can do a detailed response, but let me just pause there. We've got 2 minutes left. Is there anybody else who'd like to give a perspective to that important question in 3 parts?
Probably, I'll add Monish. So Soumya, a wonderful question, and definitely you're looking at a complete pathway of decarb. See, whenever, as a company, whenever you're investing in solar, and since I'm working with various MNCs, we're also looking at your end of life disposal cycle before making an investment. So whoever is your partner in this journey, he or she will definitely take care of your complete LCA process. Okay. We can give you a detailed response more properly. In the interest of time, I'll pause you.
Sure, thanks. I think we'll prepare a detailed response. And so let me end where I began, which is in that waiting room between certainty and departure, between what we know and what we are still learning. That increasingly is where leadership and valuation now reside. What struck me the most in this conversation is that ESG, it's not whether ESG is mainstream, but it's more to do with value chain risk, which is an aspect that everyone is looking at, whether you sit in banking, whether you sit in manufacturing, technology, or advisory. The message is the same, that ESG value chains are no longer about reporting what happened, they're about shaping what happens next. So with that, I'd like to thank all our panelists for bringing their sector depth, their practical insights. I'd like to thank all of you for being a part of this wonderful discussion. The question that has not been fully answered will be answered. We have your email. We will give you a detailed response. We are always available to address any other questions that you may have. We will send the participants a survey. Please do complete it. Let us know where we can do better and what we should cover next. Once again, thank you to the wonderful panelists. I enjoyed my discussions with you and I enjoyed interacting with all the participants. Thank you so much. Have a great day.